Hi everybody, my name is Brent, product and application trainer with Festool USA. In this build series we're going to be building a mudroom cabinet, and it's going to be in my shop. Let's get started. So I've already gone ahead and drawn up the cabinet on some 3D modeling software. I have a cut list also that I can view on my tablet. One reason I wanted to do this in my shop is to show you that you don't have to have a huge shop to break down sheet goods or build some of these projects. Back at the training center at headquarters, I have the luxury of having 8 MFTs, so I can set up as many as I want. Here in my shop, it's quite a bit smaller, so I've got 2 MFTs. I've built one into a rolling table, and I've got one that I can just fold up, push out of the way, and utilize more of the space for when I'm assembling cabinets or using some of my other equipment. I'm also going to be using the TSC 55 REB with the dust bag. When I'm breaking down sheet goods, because of the smaller space, I don't like having the cord and the hose following me around, so I can use the TSC. I still get 90% dust collection with the bag. It works just as good. So I've already gone ahead and drawn up the cabinet on some 3D modeling software. I have a cut list also that I can view on my tablet. Once I've got that all set aside, I need to set up to make my first cut. I've got 2 rails that I've joined together with the rail connectors to make one longer rail. You can go to our YouTube channel and find videos on how to join 2 rails together. So for this first cut, I'm just trying to get a good reference face. To do that, I want to make sure that I've got material on both sides of the blade. That helps with that dust extraction. So I'm only going for about 1/4 inch or 3/8 of an inch. Another thing I can do to make sure that I get that best possible dust extraction, that 90%, is make sure I lower that clear plastic viewing window all the way down to the surface once the saw is on the guide rail. Now I'm all set to make my first cut. So the first piece I'm going to cut is 36 inches wide by 84 3/4 inches long. That's wider than the parallel guides can handle, but I'm only cutting one piece, so I don't need that repetitive action that the parallel guides offer. So now all I need to do is just measure off my reference edge that we just cut, 36 inches in 2 spots. Then all I have to do is line up that splinter guard, because I know exactly where that splinter guard lands is exactly where it's going to cut. So when you're using a long rail or 2 shorter rails joined together, and you're making one long cut, trying to line up 2 points can be a challenge sometimes. If I try and move this side, that side will move. If I go around there, if I move that side, this side will move. So what I do is I get one point lined up, use my saw as an anchor, and now I can go around to that side. This side will not move, then both points are lined up where they need to be. With both ends lined up, I'm ready to make my cut. If I'm cutting something too long and I can't reach all the way across it, I can start my cut, stop, reposition, pick up right where I left off, and I won't see a cut line where I was before. Another one is, if you notice, I started cutting with my right hand on the saw. Now I'm repositioning, I'll be cutting with my left hand. Doesn't matter if I'm right or left-handed, because all I have to worry about is pushing the saw along the guide rail. I'm not controlling it left or right. So now I've got my width cut. I can get rid of this scrap piece, this guide rail, and now we need to worry about squaring up one end and cutting this entire piece to length. So if I was back in the training center, I usually have another whole station set up for my cross cutting, and then I can go back and forth between the two. But because I don't have the space, I want to go ahead and cut this to length as it sits right now. So what I typically do is I just have a good quality square, get a shorter guide rail, take my square and I reference it off the already cut parallel edge, line the guide rail up with the square edge, get my saw, make a cut, and I know it's perfectly square. So one of the questions I get a lot is, how many cuts can I make before this bag fills up? So I've done about 19 feet. This bag was completely empty when I started. So if I unzip this, dump it out, you can see that's quite a bit of dust that's not on the floor of my shop or floating around, so I'm breathing it in either. Typically for any cross cuts that I would be doing, I'd go ahead and switch this out to the 48 tooth crosscut blade or fine tooth blade. But because this panel, all the edges are going to be hidden, I'm not concerned with it. To save time, I'm gonna leave the 28 tooth ripping blade on it. So I've got one end squared. I've made all the measurements. Now I can make a cut to verify that the back panel is square. So with the back panel knocked out, I can go back and look at my cut list. I can repeat the process on this piece. The next several cuts are all going to be parallel repetitive cuts. So now I can utilize the repeatability of the parallel guides for those cuts. If you want to know more about the setup, calibration, and use of the parallel guides, you can visit our Festool USA YouTube channel. So these first two rips are going to be 16 inches. So I can go ahead and line this up, get it set. Now I can make my first 16-inch rip. So as far as the rips go in this piece, we're all done. We've just got one cross cut to do, so we'll mark that as finished. If we look at this piece, all these are going to be cross cuts first, and then I'll come back later and rip them down the correct width. So just like the previous cross cut, I've gone ahead and straight line ripped an edge here. I've squared off of that edge to give me a straight edge here. Once I have that cut, I can measure off of that good edge for all my following cuts. And I've gone ahead and switched out to the 48 tooth cross cut blade because that's mostly what I'm going to be doing from here on out. So now that I have all these pieces cut to length, I need to cross cut them to width. To do that, I've actually changed the orientation of my MFT hardware. So typically, with my MFT hardware, I'd be setting up a guide rail going across this direction. But I need more depth of cut to cut this 36-inch piece. So what I've done is I've added a 75-inch rail and I've changed the orientation of my hardware. So now I'm attaching it to the short side of the MFT, which gives me a greater depth of cut. Now it's just a matter of putting my pieces in there, squaring them up, and cutting my final dimensions. So in the previous cuts, I just went ahead and measured out each and every piece, made my cuts, and then moved on to the next one. For a small project like that, that's perfectly fine. But if you're doing a lot of batch cutting, or if you're cutting a lot of pieces one right after the other, we have these flag stops for this MFT. I can go ahead and set them up, get them the measurements that I want, and then just when I'm not using them, just flip one out of the way, use the next one. So it just speeds up the process, and it makes you much more accurate and efficient. So now that I'm in a more stationary position doing these cross cuts, I can go ahead and hook up to the dust extractor. I've got a Bluetooth module on the CT26. I've got a Bluetooth battery. Now once I've paired them, when I squeeze the trigger, it automatically turns on the dust extractor. Now that I've got the big pieces of the carcass cut down to size, I've ripped them and I've cross-cut them, I can start working on some of the smaller pieces, like the drawer sides. So what I've gone ahead and done is I've rotated the MFT back to its normal position, put the fence rail and everything back on the back rail, and I've got a short 1080 rail on here now because I'm going to be using smaller widths of material. I can set my flag stops, square everything up, and then those pieces will be done as well. So I've gone ahead and removed the clear plastic viewing window and installed the outfeed splinter guard, so that way I've got the splinter guard on the guide rail and also this splinter guard to give me a splinter-free cut on both sides. Clean up this edge of the piece of plywood and then we can cut everything to length. So with the flag stop set, I can go ahead and cut these two pieces and they'll be exactly the same length. The next couple cuts I'm going to be doing are 3 inches wide. Utilizing all the hardware you see here, all I've done is I've clamped another piece of plywood down so that when I slide this piece in and butt it up against that other piece, that gives me exactly 3 inches to the cut of this board. I've got a flag stop here to lock into place. I've also added a clamp for a little bit extra security. So now I can go ahead and make 4 repetitive cuts. For the next cut I'm going to make, I'm going to cut 2 pieces at one time. So that's going to be 1.5 inches of material. So I've gone ahead and I've flipped my fence rail up in the vertical position to give me full support of that full 1.5 inches of material. Another thing I need to do is switch out my flag stops. So the flag stops I had been using, these are the flag stops for the Capex UG stand extensions. This is the actual flag stop for the MFT3. So when I put this on the fence, now I've got full support the whole way down for those 2 pieces of 3/4 inch material. So now I'll just follow the same process. I'll square up one end so that I can cut them to length. So this is the final cut of plywood that we need to do, and this is the cut for the center support of the drawer box. So now that I've broken down all the sheet goods for our cabinet, I'm going to move on to the face frame material. In this case, I've just got some poplar. It's going to be painted. So one of the questions I get asked a lot about Festool system is how you break down narrow stock with the TS55 and the guide rail. One of the biggest concerns you have when you're ripping narrow stock like this is only 5.5 inch material, is making sure you got support underneath the guide rail. So what I do is I've always got a piece of material that's the same thickness as the piece that I'm cutting down to put underneath the back side of the guide rail, so that when I'm ripping, I've got full support underneath both sides of the guide rail. So I've already gone through the process of calibrating the parallel guides to the guide rail and to the saw. If you want to know more about that, check out the link in the description. I've gone ahead and taken off the 28 tooth blade and I put on the 48 tooth blade. So these boards have already been surfaced all 4 sides, so I don't need to worry about it getting a fresh clean cut on the edge. I've got my parallel guide set to 2 inches, so now I'm ready to cut. So I just needed one 2-inch piece. Now I can switch it to 1.5 inches. So as I get these pieces cut, I'll just move them back behind the other piece. Then as I slide my guide rail forward, I've got support underneath the entire guide rail. So I've got all the pieces cut out of that first board that I have, and this is the remainder that I've got left, so that's my scrap. Now I can just continue and finish the rest of my cuts. So now we've got all of our pieces ripped to width. Now we can move over to the Capex and cut them down to length. I've got it built into my cabinet system. I can still take this on and off and use it on our UG stand if I need to. But now we're ready to start cutting. So with all the face frame material broken down, we've got our sheet good material broken down, I can move on to some of the decorative parts of the cabinet. A beadboard for the back panel. In the drawing, you may have noticed that the back panel of that cabinet looks like beadboard. Well, all I've got is just standard 3/4 inch birch plywood. So I purchased a beadboard bit, and I'll use that to actually make some faux beads in the panel itself. It's very simple to do with the Festool system. I'm just using the OF1010 router. I've got my 2 rails that are already connected, and then with the router I've got a guide stop that will actually ride along the guide rail and connect to the router to give me a perfectly straight pattern that I want to achieve. So as far as the layout of the beads, I did it every 6 inches. You could do whatever you want. It's totally up to you. So to simplify the process, I'm just going to clamp the guide rail so it's exactly 1 inch away from the center line of my bead. Then all I have to do is just line up the center line of my router to that, lock those down. Now for each one that I move it over, it's going to be exactly the same. Anytime I'm doing any routing with a profile bit, I'll always do a sample piece, just so I can practice on a scrap piece before I actually dial it in on my finished piece. Once I've got it dialed in, I've got my depth set, I can make my first pass. So because of the birch plywood that I'm using, it's not a Baltic birch, after my first pass, some of the fibers of the plywood are still showing through. So with the Festool routers, what I can do is adjust my micro adjust down a couple tenths of a millimeter and just clean up that pass and make a nice smooth joint. So with the first one done, it's just a matter of moving it down, 1 inch passed. I'll clamp the other end and bring this back to the original first pass depth and do it all over again. So for this last groove, if I do the same process that I've been doing thus far, when I go to move it an inch past that pencil line, I run out of room to clamp it down to my material. So, easy fix is just spin the guide rail around and go an inch the other direction. And it'll be the same exact layout. So once I've got all these grooves routed in here, you can see there's some rough spots that are still left behind. That's more due to the quality of the plywood. To be honest with you, I couldn't get Baltic birch plywood during this time, so I just got with the cabinet grade plywood. And so I can just go back with one of our hand sanding blocks with a slight bevel on it and just clear up any of those rough spots that I might see. And once that's done, we can move on to the next step. I want to go ahead and also put a dado in the back panel for that upper shelf. I've already gone ahead and set up the 1400 router with the guide stop. If you want to see more about doing that, we've got plenty of videos to show you. Once I've got the guide stop set up and the placement of the router set up, next thing I do is set my depth. I get a lot of questions about how to set the depth on the 1400 or any of our routers really, but I'm going to show you on the 1400. It's very simple. First thing I want to do is just bottom it out. Once it's bottomed out, lock it into place. And then after you do that, you've got to zero everything out on the depth setting. So that's this rod right here. So I'm going to push that all the way down so it's touching one of the posts on the turret. Push this other lever down that goes up and down. Lock that into place, and now I'm zeroed out. Next, I need to determine how deep I want to go with my dado. And I know that's going to be 3/8 of an inch. So because I'm zeroed out, now all I have to do is just loosen that knob, raise this up, loosen that, and now there's a scale on the side. I could try and find exactly where 3/8 of an inch is. I don't trust my eyes. I get a spacer block. This is exactly 3/8 of an inch. There's a lot of different gauge blocks on the market. Follow the same process. Lock that into place, just like that. Now I know there's an exactly 3/8 of an inch gap right there. With the depth set on the router, next thing I need to do is figure out where I need to start and stop for my stop dados, because I don't want these dados to go all the way through so you can see them on the finished project. So to do that, I could try and line up and sight down where my router bit is. To me, that's just too difficult. So what I'm going to do is use one of our limit stops, one on each side of the router. To do that, it's pretty easy to set it up. On this little support foot, we've got a numerical scale on there. We've got 0 all the way up to 22 millimeters. So if I find 0 and put that on my line, I know the center of my bit is directly on the center of my line. Well, I don't want that to be like that because I want to be on the other side of my line with my complete router bit. That router bit's 18 millimeters. So if I go 9 millimeters on the other side of that line, that means the edge of my router bit is now going to start at my line going that way. Then all I have to do is just place my limit stop on the guide rail, lock it into place. Now the guide stop holds it in place. I'll do the same thing down there. Now I've got a start and stop point. So with everything set, I'm ready to start routing. So now with the dado in place, I can just use a scrap piece of wood for a test fit. This is the same material I'm going to be using for the shelf. Fits nice and snug, not too loose. If it was too tight, I could utilize this green dial right here, which is the micro adjust to move the router in and out. Each one of those marks is 1/10 of a millimeter. So that could give me just a little bit more so that piece would slide in there even easier. Last two things I need to do is grab a piece of sandpaper and take care of these fibers that are left behind, then also get a nice sharp chisel and square off these rounded edges. So the next thing I'm going to do is the same process on these side panels for that upper cabinet, just like I did on the back panel. I've gone ahead and taken off the limit stops because this is going to be a through dado. I've just clamped these two boards together so now I can do one long pass and finish dados in both of them at the same time. Kept the settings for the guide stop and the router the same as on the back panel, so now we're ready to make a dado. So now that we've got the side panels and the back panel of that upper cabinet all dadoed, I'm going to start working on the drawers. For my drawers, I use 3/4 inch stock for the sides and the front and back, and then the bottom is going to be actually a 1/2 inch material. I want these drawers to be nice and durable. There's a couple different ways you can do the dado for the 1/2 inch stock on the bottom. You could use our 1010, 1400, or 2200 router handheld with an edge guide and do that just as easy. I've got a CMS here, so I'm going to go ahead and use the CMS. Because I have such a small shop, what I tend to do is I build rolling carts for a lot of my tools. I've got the rolling MFT stand. I built a rolling cart for the CMS, so when the CMS sits on top of it, it's the same height as the MFT, my MFT rolling stand, and also my countertops. If you want to learn more about calibrating and setting up the CMS, check out some more of those videos on our YouTube channel. So once everything's adjusted correctly, I got everything locked down, I go ahead and turn it on and run all my dados. So with the dados done, we can move on to the exciting part of getting it assembled. So all that hard work has now gotten us to the exciting stage of assembly. To assemble this upper cabinet and the lower cabinet, we're going to be using the DOMINO DF 500 loose mortising machine. We're also going to be using the 5mm tenons. I've taken the time and I've labeled absolutely everything I can possibly label, where my tenons are going to go. That way I don't make any mistakes. From there, it's just a matter of hooking it up to the dust extractor and making some mortises. If you want to see the Domino in action and learn more about it, we have plenty of other videos to check out. So with all the layout done, all the settings adjusted correctly, now it's just a matter of lining up the sight gauge and making a mortise. Just so that I have a better sight line, I'm going to move these marks from the edge up to the face of my back panel. So with the first side panel done, I can work on the back panel. To do that, I've added the support foot to give me a little more support when I'm doing mortises going straight down. So I've got all the mortises done there. I'm going to go ahead and dry fit this side. So now I'll do the exact same process on the other side. So you may have noticed that this cabinet is a little bit shorter than it started out to be. And that is because I cut about 10 inches off of it. As I'm going through the building process, I'm constantly thinking about how I can improve it. And I started to realize that transporting this cabinet all as one was going to be very difficult. So what my plan is now is I've separated the upper cabinet and the lower cabinet, and I'll attach part of that beadboard to the lower cabinet. Obviously the rest of the upper cabinet is going to have the beadboard on it. And then I'm going to join these two pieces back together with our domino connectors. That way I can carry in the lower cabinet to this location, then carry in the upper cabinet, attach the two with the domino connectors and a couple screws through the back, and it'll be very secure. So because I'm joining this bottom to the top of the back panel with the domino connectors, I've gone ahead and changed the cutter to an 8mm cutter. Now I can go ahead and make my mortises. So now I'll just finish up the mortises on the bottom portion. So after I did a test fit, made sure everything was looking okay, I went ahead and applied some glue, secured it with some screws from the backside, and now I can go ahead and install the top of the cabinet. For this, I'm not going to use any dominoes. I'm just going to put some glue on it, tack it in place with my brad nailer, and then I'll go back and install some screws because it's all going to be covered by the crown molding anyway. So now I've got the upper cabinet all glued up and assembled. I can set it aside and start working on the lower cabinet. I've gone ahead and I've laid out where the center panel is going to go. I've labeled front, back, bottom, sides, and I've got all my mortises marked. So now it's just a matter of going through, making the mortises, and then we can start assembling it. The first thing I'm going to do is the center panel. I'm going ahead and clamped it to the bottom of the base cabinet. I've laid out the position and I've clamped it right on the back line. So now all I have to do is I can mortise straight down into my bottom panel. I can mortise into the center panel at the same time. And then when I stand it up, it'll fall directly on those two lines that I've laid out. So with the center mortises done on both the bottom panel and the center panel, you can go ahead and do the end mortises. With all the mortises in the base cabinet, I can go ahead and do a test fit. So with the base cabinet all dry fit, I can take it apart, glue it up, put it in some clamps, then it and the upper cabinet will all be finished. I can move on to the face frames. So now I've got the upper and the base cabinet assembled, I can start working on face frames. I've pre-cut all my stock to length. I still like to go through and double check to make sure the measurements are accurate because there might be some variance in the thickness of the material. So I know on the sides, the stiles, I'm going to have a 4mm offset. And you'll see why that's important when I start using the domino. So I just take a 4mm tenon, use that as my spacer, make sure that's flush. I'll do the same thing on the other side, and then I'll measure in between to make sure that my rails will fit in between. Then it's just a matter of marking out where all the mortise locations are, making the mortises, and then assembling it. Now I've got everything laid out and marked for exactly where I want the mortises. The mortise spacing really depends on the material you're going to be using. So now it's just a matter of getting the domino set up, and we can put the mortises in and get this face frame installed. So I'm going to start out with the rail for the top of the cabinet and the rail for the shelf first. Those are going to end up being flush with the top of the cabinet, and then this one will be flush with the top of the shelf. To do that, I'm going to be using a 5x30 tenon. So I've got the height of the fence set at 20mm, and then I've got the depth of the plunge at 15, because half of 30 is 15. So, like any material that you're using the domino on, let the machine do the work. Don't force it, don't try and push too fast. Make sure you've got dust extraction on it. Now we're ready to mortise. So with the two rails out of the way, those are going to be flush with the shelf and the upper part of the cabinet. Now I can start working on the stiles. And these are where I'm going to have the reveal, the 4mm reveal. So rather than having to go through and change all my mortise marks on here and do a lot of math, all I need to do is on the side of the domino, I can change my fence height from 20mm, which half of that is 10. If I go all the way up to 28, push that down, half of 28 is 14. The difference between 14 and 10 is exactly 4mm. That'll give me exact 4mm offset. So I've got the mortises in the bottom of this face frame for the edge of the plywood right here. Now I need to do the mortises to attach the center rails. For the shelf, I went ahead and marked a line center here and center on the piece itself. That'll line up perfectly with that 5mm tenon. Now on the edge here, typically what I would do, because this is going to be perfectly flush, I would just use the flaps right here, which are 37mm from the center of the domino to the flap itself. But my material is about 1.5 inches wide, or approximately 40mm. So by the time I do that, I would have my mortise hanging outside the edge of my material. So now I'm just going to use the flaps on the support base, which adds distance in there. So now it's 20mm from the center of the mortise to the edge of my material. And I always want to double check and make sure that I sent the fence height back to 20mm and not 28 when I'm moving to the face frames. So now I'll do the same thing on the other stile. So now with all the mortises done, it's time for a dry fit. So I've got everything dry fit, everything looks good. I can go ahead and put some glue on it, throw some clamps on it, and then I can start working on the base cabinet face frame. So now that I've got the whole base cabinet assembled, I also went ahead and installed some runners. These runners are to attach the drawer slides to. If I didn't have those runners on there, when I put the drawer slides on, they'd be right up against the outside edge of the plywood. And if I did that, I wouldn't be able to put much of a face frame on there, or it'd be sticking way out too far this way. This allows me to move my face frame in a little bit. I do lose a little space for the drawers, but not that much. Gives it a better look in my opinion. And always make sure to label all your pieces, especially when you're doing multiple pieces of face frame material. So I went ahead and set the base cabinet out of the way, so I've got plenty of working space. I like to then just go ahead and lay out my face frame, double check my marks, make sure everything looks correct. For the face frame of this poplar, I'm going to jump up to a 6x40 tenon. Because it's solid poplar, it can handle a little bit thicker of a tenon and a mortise. It's a little bit stronger, a little bit more glue up surface, and will make for a really strong joint. So now I'll go ahead and change my bit, get my clamp set up, and then I can start mortising. With my mortise depth set and my fence height set, I'm ready to make some mortises. Now that I've got all the mortises done, I can move on to the dry fit. So with the dry fit looking good, I can go ahead and take it apart, glue it up, and then put it on the cabinet. So once the base cabinet face frame was all dried up, I took it out of the clamps, sanded it down lightly, and then I attached it to the base cabinet just like I did in the upper cabinet. While it was still up here, I went ahead and attached this top. This top is just several hickory boards that I glued up, cut to size, and then put a 3/8 inch round over on it. So when I went to attach the top to the base cabinet, all I did was drill some elongated holes in the base cabinet, got some washers, put my screw through the washer, screwed it down, so that's going to allow the top to expand and contract separately from the base cabinet. I went ahead and installed the drawer slides. That's going to help me with the next step, which is going to be the drawers. Now I've got the upper and the base cabinet finished with the face frames, I can start working on the drawer boxes. So these will be pretty straightforward. I've marked all the appropriate faces on my drawer boxes. I'm going to utilize the 2 flaps, so all the mortises are going to be 37 millimeters from the edge. I've gone ahead and changed the cutter back to a 5mm cutter, so we'll use the 5x30 tenons. I've set my fence height and my depth to the appropriate depths, and I'm going to go ahead and start using the Vaxis just to speed up the process. So with all the mortises cut, we can go ahead and dry fit with the bottom panels and see how they fit. So now that I got the dry fit done, everything looks good, I can go ahead and put some glue on it, throw it in some clamps. Next thing we're going to move on to is creating the drawer front panels. I've got a finished panel here, installed the hardware, got a round over edge, everything's sanded. So with all my parts pre-cut, I can get into assembling the second panel. So there's a couple different ways we can build the panel for this drawer front. We could use a tongue and groove bit on a router. We can use a dado blade on a table saw. The best way, the most efficient way I've found is just by using our MFK 700 along with the edge guide to make the 6mm groove to accept the panel. So with the center line marked on my board, got the center line marked on the base of my router, then I can just turn the micro adjust dial to get it perfectly lined up, tighten things down, put the base back on the router. On our panel, the stiles are going to have a stop dado because I don't want to see that groove going all the way through on the finished product. So I've gone ahead and I've marked out the center of where my bit wants to be when I stop, and I've also marked out the edge of my router base at that point. So that way I know where to start the router and stop the router. With the stop dados done, I can go ahead and run the rails all the way through. So with the dados done, we can move on to the dominoing and then assembly. I went ahead and laid the frame out exactly how it's going to go. I'll go ahead and label it so I know which sides go with which. And that also tells me which side is going to face up when I'm doing the dominoes. And for these, I laid out the dado so that I can utilize the 20mm flaps on my support base, and it's not going to interfere with the dado that I already put in the material. For these longer pieces, since I'm going into this face rather than the end, I'm going to go ahead and clamp these down. So now I've got all of the one side done, I can change the flaps and do the other side. By using the 20mm flaps, I've got good placement on my mortise and it's not interfering with the dado. So with all the mortises done, I can go ahead and do my dry fit and make sure everything fits correctly. With the dry fit looking good, I can go ahead and pop it apart, glue it up, put it in clamps, and then I'll walk through the process of attaching it to the drawer itself. Now I can go ahead and install the drawer slides. I've simplified it for myself. I just cut a spacer block, put that on the bottom of the cabinet, put my drawer slide in there, pre-drill, run my screws, take it out, do it on this other side. Then they're exactly the same height off the bottom of the cabinet. So now I can go ahead and install the runners on the side of the drawer, which I'm just going to have them flush with the bottom of the drawer. Gone ahead and pulled the panel out of the clamps, did some light sanding, laid out where my drawer is going to be so it matches this one exactly. There's a lot of different ways you can attach a panel. The way I typically do it on this one, because it's going to be painted, is I'm just going to hold it up in place, use my headless pinner, just put 2 pins in it, then I can pull it out and attach it permanently. So for locations marked for my drawer pull, I can go ahead and drill the holes and attach it to the drawer front. With that complete, now it's just a matter of joining the upper and lower cabinet. So now that I've got the upper and lower cabinet fully assembled, I can join the two together. We're going to be using the domino connectors. The main reason for that is just to make it easier to transport. If you want to learn more about the domino connectors, go check out some of the videos we have on those. So with all the domino connectors installed, I'm going to go ahead and put the upper cabinet on the base cabinet to finish installing the back panel. Now that I got the upper cabinet on the base cabinet, I can go ahead and attach the back panel for the upper cabinet with a couple screws, and then also go ahead and install the lower back panel. So with everything secured, one of the last steps is to apply the crown molding, which I'll do over here on the Capex. So I've pulled all the measurements off of my upper cabinet. Now I can come over to the Capex and start cutting my crown. And because I've got my Capex installed into my countertop, I've left a lip that I can clamp things to, and this allows me to clamp down a sacrificial board for my crown stop. So now I can go ahead and make the 3 cuts I need for my upper cabinet. With all 3 pieces of crown molding cut, I can go ahead and get it installed. Before I do that, I went ahead and I notched the face frame for that 1/4 inch reveal right to where the bottom of the crown is going to sit. So I've got my crown molding on, and I've already gone ahead and installed my hardware. This is just so I've got the hardware and the holes for the hardware already in there before I start to sand and paint. That way when I'm done with the complete project, all I have to do is reinstall the screws. I'm going to go through and lightly sand everything, touch up any spots that might need any wood filler from the nail holes, just give it a good once over. But from there, I can apply paint. You don't have to paint it. You could get a different type of wood. You can even get a stain that will look good with this birch plywood and the poplar. I'm just choosing to paint it, but there's a lot of different things you could do. Thanks for watching this build series. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got some sanding and painting to do.